See this screen right here? I bought this guy recently. It's very blue. I'll explain why it's so blue. But basically, I put a camera right outside my studio because I'm working here, the door's right behind me, and sometimes people come in and I'm like, what the f? Other times I'll be working here and I'll hear a noise or something, and it's not that I'm scared or there's any danger or anything like that, but it just, you know, you're working and your subconscious mind worries or wonders like, what could that sound be? And by having this here, I'll just look here, it's like, oh, it's Ali, or oh, whatever, right? Oh, I love when this happens. It used to happen more often.
When we were in the first apartment.
Yes, but now...
Ugly apartment.
But now...
cozy.
Exactly. I'm mixing. She's there to absorb some of the high frequency reflections coming from there. Get absorbed there, and so I don't get the reflections back to me. ¿Y si fue cariño que estás a gusto aquí? ¿Sí? ¿Estás a gusto, cariño? The reason why it's so blue is because I was procrastinating, and usually you'll have the best ideas when you are procrastinating, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna have a light here. I've got a light that is blue. No, it's not blue, it's RGB, meaning you can change the color of this light. And I thought, when I'll enter the studio, it'd be cool if every time that I enter the studio, kind of like have a light that sort of like creates a mood, and then this puts me kind of like to get ready to kind of like to start working or something. It's stupid, right? Maybe let's get started. Today we're talking about low percussion. I'm mixing this cue. Sounds like this. I generally don't mix my music. I have someone else mix my music. But this is a project that has no budget. It's something that I'm doing for myself. It's not for a movie. And I wanted to do something, I wanted to compose something that's long, that has a structure, that has music development, and that is not tied to a video game or a movie. And so that's what I'm doing. But this I'm doing because I want. It's because I don't have enough in my plate, and I figured that I would just do more. The idea with that is I'm gonna document the journey as I'm composing and mixing, and I'll post that on YouTube. Every 1 or 2 weeks, I may be done with one movement, like 2-3 minutes of music, and it's composed and mixed. And then I'll explain what I've done. And then at the end of those 1 or 2 weeks, I'll show that 2 or 3 minutes of music. But I have to be practical as well. It's not like I'm gonna put all the time here, because I'm a composer. I have my projects. I've got cinematic composing. I teach. I've got kids. Long story short, I don't have a lot of time for mixing. I'll compose and I'll make it sound as good as I can, and then I'll do a quick mix. But I'm not gonna export like 40 or 60 or 80 tracks and then I'll mix that, because that is a lot of work. Instead, as I explained last week, I'm gonna be mixing with the stems. Instead of mixing each single track, violins 1 staccato, violins 1 tremolo, violins, I'll group the tracks. Let's say high strings, low strings, high brass, low brass, high, mid, low percussion, except synths, etc. And so instead of having to mix 60 tracks, I can get away with just 12 or 20. The point of the matter is, when you're mixing like this, you don't have control over every single element, and sometimes you end up with something like this. Percussion low. There's a lot of percussion in that track. And in my opinion, mixing is like composing, but without having to think about the notes. But essentially, when you are mixing, you're starting over. With the first track, I usually start with the high strings or the violins, and then I do all the strings, and then I do woods, and then I do brass, and then I do percussion. But I start track by track. I set the first track, and then the second one, and then I start balancing the different tracks as I go. And it feels like composing without having to think about the music, about the notes itself. You don't have to come up with the ideas, with the melodies and motifs, because you don't have to think about creating the musical part. You have more mental capacity to focus on how to position all the sounds and making it in a way that is organized and allows the listener to more clearly hear each one of the musical parts. So sometimes when I'm mixing, and this is basically the tracks that I exported from my composing project and I put them here. So it's essentially the exact same thing that I had when I was composing. But when I'm mixing, I'll do things like, I think this snare was a little bit too loud. I'm gonna bring it down a little bit. Or, I think these horns sound a little bit too muddy, a little bit muffled. I think I'll need to brighten them a little bit. Or maybe they sound a little bit muddy, have to cut a little bit of that muddy area. Or, I think there's a little bit too much weight on the left side of percussion. I'm gonna move the timpani over the right side. I'm gonna compensate a little bit with the grand casa. So it's about positioning the instruments the right way, and sometimes enhancing specific parts of the sound of a specific instrument to get a little bit more brightness or aggression, etc. And then there are a few more things like reverb and all that, but it's also about positioning and the space. And at the end of the day, when you've repositioned everything a little bit better than when you were composing, you end with a more interesting mix, more cinematic, and all that good stuff. Boy! I have been called. I have to go up a second. All right, I'm coming back. See this blue light? Isn't this awesome? All right, but mixing, what for sure mixing is not something that you do to fix composing mistakes. That is not what you do with mixing. Mixing is something that you do because you have time and you want to make your music sound a 5% or a 10% better. So when you are mixing with the stems, like what I'm doing now, meaning a smaller group of tracks instead of having every single individual track, instead of getting to that 10% improvement, my goal is that it reduces the amount of time that I have to spend mixing. And instead of being able to get my music to sound a 10% better, maybe I get to an 8% better. Now, we've said that one of the goals when mixing is to gain a little bit of clarity in general, make that sonic escape a little bit more transparent, a little bit easier for the listener to identify the different musical elements. So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about how to clean up something that has a lot going on. And obviously, all the instruments, I've got 4 or 5 percussion instruments printed in this stem. I won't be able to separate those. But sonically, how can I make it a little bit cleaner? And I'm gonna show you 3 ways of doing this. You can either do one or the other, or you can combine the 3 of them. 4, actually 4. The first one would be EQ, right? Just EQ and find that muddy frequency or muddy area and cut a little bit of that, and maybe finding, the part of this stem that sounds more clear, or brighten it a little bit when you add a little bit of, a little bit of 2, 3, 4K. Then sometimes that brightens the sound, and brightening the sound adds clarity. So that would be the first option, or the most obvious option, just the EQ. But I'm gonna show you 3 other options, more effective, each one of them, and even more effective if you combine the 3 of them. So I said 4 because I thought that EQ was not included here, but it was included here. So it's actually 3, okay? The first one is cut muddiness. And essentially this is what it means. So this is the percussion track. There's a lot going on here. There's a little bit of muddiness. This is the EQ that I've applied. I cut a little bit at around 250, a little bit more at around 90, and there's a shelf here at 25. Here's without the EQ. Here's with the EQ. I'm not adding any high frequencies, but all of a sudden it seems like if it sounded a little bit brighter. And actually what's happening is that because we are cutting those frequencies that are the MADI area, those frequencies were masking some of the higher frequencies, and we aren't able to hear the higher frequencies because of, if we cut those lower frequencies, all of a sudden it appears to sound brighter and we gain definition. So when this guy is yellow, it means it's bypassed, it's not active. When I click and it's gray again, it is active. See, it's pretty amazing. And the cool thing is that is the way to go. Truly, it's not, especially EQing, it's not about adding, it's about cutting most of the time. It's about shaping the sound, shaping like the shaper, that shapes surfboards. It starts with a piece of foam and then it starts shaping it into a surfboard, right? So the same thing here applies to music in general. There's not an infinite space. It's limited. The sonic space that we've got, the 3 dimensions, high, high, low, right? Then we've got in front and then farther away, depth, and then we've got left and right. So it's this 3-dimensional space, sonic space. So if we zoom at the micro level, when we are EQing a track, it's always a better idea to cut than to add. Because when we cut, we are reducing the amount of sonic information that we are trying to fit in that not infinite space, if that makes sense. So what I mean is this approach, this is dope, this is good. This one instead, this one is lame. This one is not cool. Here's the problem though. Sometimes when we are mixing, it feels like we need a little bit more of clarity or aggression or edge, and we reach for those frequencies in the higher range. And with those frequencies, generally what happens is that we're gonna bring them up a little bit. The ear gets used to it easy. It's like I'm gonna bring up 2 dBs, right? And it makes a difference. Maybe I'm bringing up 2 dBs at 4K, and it makes a difference. 1 second later, my ear has already adjusted to that new sound, and it's like, I think I need a little bit more, and then we bring it up a little bit more. And it's like, I think I need a little, and bring it up, and all of a sudden it's just too bright. Rule of thumb: don't add more than 3 or cut more than 3 dBs, and you'll be in the safe range. Option number 2 is brightening the sound with a little bit of multiband compression. So this guy here is the Lindell 354E. I'm not gonna explain every setting in here, but basically what you'll see is 3 bands, 3 compressors at the same time. 1 compressor for the low frequencies, another one for the mid frequencies, another one for the high frequencies. And I've compressed each one of these in a way that once it's compressed, adjusting the amount of compression threshold ratio and the output, the gain of each one of the bands, I brought up a little bit of the high frequencies and the mid frequencies. In that way, we're gonna gain clarity, but in a more organic way than if we added a little bit of high frequencies in a regular EQ plugin. And now I'm gonna start not active, and I'm gonna activate it towards the middle. One more time. The trick is here in this gain, and this gain. I sort of like compress the 3 more or less the same. See that the 3 are compressing more or less the same and at the same speed of attack and release. But I keep the output, the gain of the low frequencies a little bit lower than the one in the mid frequencies, and the higher frequencies are a little bit higher. This track is very busy. There's a lot going on, and it is very appropriate to do it this way because the compressor, the multiband compressor, it's gonna bring up those high frequencies at the appropriate time depending on what instrument is louder in the mix, if that makes sense. Low frequencies usually are the hardest in a mix, and so here we're compressing them a little bit just to keep them under control. Mid frequencies, we're compressing them a little bit. That is great with percussion, compressing a little bit, 2-3 dBs maybe of compression, bringing them up a little bit. In that mid range, there's more clarity than in the low end, the low range. And then the high frequencies, same deal, compressing maybe a little bit less because we don't need that much compression in the higher range, starting like at 3K. but then bringing them up in an organic way adds a little bit of clarity. All right, number 3, and I came here because it deserves your attention.
Attention, please.
With this one alone would be enough to make a big difference, very meaningful difference, and we don't even need a plugin. Here's the problem with orchestral music in general, and specifically this type of more like epic cinematic music where we've got all the orchestral melodic elements and also percussive elements. We've got orchestral percussion, ethnic percussion, epic percussion, we've got maybe synth percussion, we've got all the synths, the pulses, the drums, the punches, the hits, we've got it's a lot, and a lot of percussion as well. The problem with percussion, and it's always the same thing, it's trying to find the balance with the melodic orchestral instruments and the percussion. If the percussion is too loud, then we're overpowering the orchestra and we lose a little bit of the emotional content of the piece. If the melodic orchestral instruments are too loud, then we lose the punch and the power and the epic side of the mix. The percussion doesn't sound loud enough. Now, the problem with percussion when we've got a lot going on, it's the same problem than with the orchestra when there's a lot going on. It just starts sounding muddy. And the reason why it sounds muddy is because this concept is called conflicting decays. There's a lot going on. Some of these hits have a longer tail, and when we've got a lot going on, sometimes we have that problem, conflicting decays, and that decay just conflicts with the next percussive hit. And if there's a lot of that, then it just starts sounding messy and muddy, and we lose that clarity and that punch that we want out of the percussion. Whatever instrument you're using, make sure that you don't have conflicting decays. And the best moment where you can control that is when you are composing. But let's say that you are mixing and you've got a stem like what I've got, and you don't have the ability, well, you could go back and you could change it, but let's say that you are mixing and you don't have access, you have to deal with this. What do you do? Can you imagine that after all these lines that I just recorded, the camera wasn't recording? Usually after saying something like this for a few minutes, I look at the camera here and I'm like, still recording. It has happened many times. It has happened many times that I've recorded the entire video and then I'm like, I'm gonna show you 2 ways of dealing with this. The first one is easier and faster. The second one takes a little bit more of editing. It's more effective. It can be more effective. So the first one is very simple. Volume automation. Look at this guy here. See? This is volume automation. And it just follows what the music is doing. Pa-pam, pa-pam, pa-pa-pa-pam, pa-pam. And literally, I just listen to the music, listen to the track. I'll activate the record, and I'll just automate volume from here. I'm gonna activate the right setting here. And now if I move this track, it's gonna get recorded here. And this may take me a couple or 3 times to get it right, but it's done like this. Lowering the volume where there are conflicting decays, so it's not as obvious. Where there's conflicting decays, to get rid of that problem in a subtle way, maybe bringing up the volume is like 1.5 or 2 or 3 dB, something subtle, but it's sonic space that we are gaining momentarily where the problem exists. And that moment is when we are lowering the volume and then bringing it up where the important hits are. Option number 2 takes a little bit more of effort and editing, but it can be more effective. Now you have to do it carefully, otherwise it could be too much. Let me explain. All right, so see, this is the same track. And here I'm going to zoom in and see these parts here. I literally cut this. So there are 2 hits here, one here and another one here. And then all this space here is just a tail, the tail of this hit. Basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna cut that tail. But if we cut that tail, it's going to be too abrupt, too much. So instead of cutting right away, we're gonna give it like a half a second or a second or so, and we're gonna fade out like this. And the final result is this. It sounds weird. It sounds like, dude, you've chopped this track. Where's my music? But when you put this in context, when you put this with the rest of the tracks, you don't even hear that. You don't even notice. What you do notice is more clarity. Let's hear this in context. We're gonna start here, the one that is chopped. And here, the one that is not chopped. So both work, but here you go, 3 options that you've got to clean up, to add a little bit of clarity to a track that is busy, like this one, low perc stem that has 4 or 5 instruments. You can use one of these 3, either the EQ, multiband compressor, or either automating volume or chopping the track, or you can combine the 3 of them. That's what I've done. I'm gonna do the before and after, but I've got 1 minute of battery left. Hopefully the camera won't stop on me and I'll lose everything that I recorded. But here we go. So I'm gonna bypass all the effects and the automation, and then I'm gonna bring everything back so you can hear the difference. So no effects and no volume automation. Sounds like this. And now with the effects. And now with the volume automation added. I hope this was useful. Please subscribe to support the channel. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.